Welcome everyone to another episode of the Kaleidoscope podcast. And today's episode is going to be dedicated towards the author of this book, The Three Houses. And it's written by our co-host, Kulbir Colin Singh Dillon. And I've personally known Colin for about 25 years, Yeah. Probably, right? The better part of 25 years. And this book actually encapsulates a lot of the conversations we've had over the years around, what it means to live a fulfilled life. But, without further ado, let me introduce Colin, and perhaps we'll start off with, Col, can you help us understand why you call this book The Three Houses? What does that mean? Because, that could mean different things to many different people, right? So help us understand what the three houses signify, what they stand for, and why you chose that name.
Well, it definitely doesn't stand for our house in Punjab, my parents' house in the UK, and my house in Canada, because some people have actually thought that those are the three houses. The three houses for me is this gathering of places that we tend to reside in physically and mentally. So the first house is this one that we live in, this kind of, mortal body made of mud. So house number one is this. House number two is the one that you create typically with a loved one, or you invest into with a company or an employer. And so that's house number two. And the third house, which, I use the symbol of the circle. I'm not a football, player that's just scored a goal and he's doing the heart shape. But I use the symbol of the circle, which represents the global village. And that's all about contribution. So for me, it's the expansiveness of where our energy is and in those typical houses. So those are the three houses.
That's
very nice.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask, what made you even want to write this book in the first place?
Or should you ask me who made me write this book in the first place?
Who was your...
So Michael Pinball Clements became a good friend of mine about 8 years ago. We met through a mutual friend, and we began to go out for lunch and just chat, catch up, and learn about each other. His story, for those that are here in Canada, obviously know Michael's story well. He is a Canadian football player, legendary, multiple record holder, went on to be the captain, went on to be the coach, and today he's the chair of the Toronto Argonauts. But Michael's story, similar to, I would say, maybe less yours, Diljit, because you grew up here, but definitely more Arbinder and myself. Our stories of growing up, being people of color in a very white community. Michael grew up in Florida. I grew up in the black country, similar to Arbinder. And so we would talk about the challenges we both had. And the one thing he used to say literally at every lunch meeting was, you have every right to walk around with a chip on your shoulder, but you don't. And we've got to share that with the world. Mm-hmm. And he used to just keep going on about that, hearing stories and hearing my philosophy of life. And then he was like, you've got to write a book. And I'm like, Michael, I'm from England. I can barely spell. My grammar sucks. My punctuation is brutal. And he's like, get a ghostwriter. You have to capture this in a book. We have to then get you in front of people, and you need to share your story. Because he said, people are curling up in fetal positions and being somewhat of a victim for a fraction of what some of us have maybe gone through in life. And so it is that outlook on life, which is what he wanted me to share. And, 7 years of accumulation of effort. I spent a good 3.5 years, and then I shelved it for about 3 years. And now we're ready to launch.
Okay, wow. Incredible.
Yeah, when you said, you said something, this is something we've touched on before, but you talked about this, you have every right to have a chip on your shoulder. You talked about this victim mentality. And I know, throughout this book, you've kind of touched upon those key concepts. So when you talk about this chip on your shoulder, you have every right to have a chip on your shoulder, but you still need to share the story with the world. What's the context of around that chip on your shoulder, and why is it important to get this message out?
We all have adversity in life, whether it's created in the home, created through relationships, created in our place of employment or school. There are challenges that we all face. And when you as an individual choose to carry that, and to maybe wear the t-shirt of saying, hey, this is what happened to me, or this is how somebody spoke to me, or this is what somebody said to me, you're carrying that. And a loved one close to you may be compassionate around that topic, but the reality is you're literally carrying that on your own. That is on you. That anger, that anguish is on you. That chip, which you think you have every right to have. So the book is the three houses. And so I've used the metaphor of architecture and building to break down the 18, 19 chapters. The first section is called the foundational years. The second middle section is the building years. And then the final section is the decor. Because to me, the stuff that happens in the decor is the stuff that I think is of substance and value for people to want to go, oh, wow, like, oh my God, look, this guy, born and brought up in the UK, a little turban boy, close to his faith from I've been keeping the starter turban since I was 6 years old. My parents became religious in 1976. The summer prior, we had a haircut. The summer after, the hair was long enough for it to be tied in a small kind of a top knot. And we didn't go to the top knot ghost cover, the Ramal. We went straight hardcore starched turban that ripped up your ears, boom. So I went from having no turban to a turban. And then I never took it off as well. The only time my turban came off at school was for swimming. Imagine being in sports, in every kind of sports you can imagine that the Brits play, rugby included, and never removing the turban, because the challenge was, it was the 1970s. We had 17% unemployment rates in Tipton, where I grew up. Everybody and their neighbor wanted to blame the immigrants for taking the jobs. You packies are taking our jobs. And so we heard that at school. We heard it from parents of children. And then when it began to kind of, when, you're a young tender age, you don't quite understand the concept of what do they mean we've taken their jobs. And so this was the continuation of what was being fired. And then it carried on all the way, I would say, until, lightly until I was at university. Basically, until I was in the UK. I left the UK in 93. I came to Canada, and I've never faced that level of racism. Yet, as a 51-year-old today, or a 41-year-old 10 years ago, or a 31-year-old, I've never gone on about, the reason I am the way I am is because of the effing racism I've faced. And I am an issue with you, and it's because of what I went through, and you don't know. Yeah, a lot of people don't know. But I don't walk around with that. For me, that is what I call on the back of the book, baggage. That is baggage, and it's heavy stuff. So guess what? When I travel for business today, I do it with I don't check any luggage in. I literally have a small Samsonite suitcase bag, which allows me to pack suits. I take one piece and I go for a week, 10 days. And so for me in life physically as well, I don't carry baggage. For me to carry that baggage from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s today, it would be heavy on me, not on Arbinder, not on Diljit, not on my wife Satinder.
You can create a lot of resentment when you just hold that kind of stuff and you carry it along with you for years and years, I think a lot of people, they tend to do that unknowingly.
It's a victim mentality, I say. You hear other people talk about it. Look, I'm a victim for that 24-hour, 48-hour, maybe 3-day, 5-day window. Look, there is a story of me being, 13, 14 years old, and then a group of skinheads, being 16, 17. Now we've all gone through high school, and we understand, how the physicality in difference between a 14-year-old kid and a 17-year-old, and all of that kind of stuff that separates those two age groups. I was chased for weeks by a gang of skinheads. They would come into the school and beat me up. They would throw me into canal and beat me up. It just seemed every new route I found to get home, my God, they're there. And most of my friends were white. And I literally used to just say, guys, you guys cross the road, and I'm about to peg it this way, and we'll see where things go. And it only came to a head when they threw me, they chased me, they threw me into the canal. I got home, had a school uniform on. I didn't want my parents to know. I'm up in the tub, throwing in washing up powder into the tub, and I'm washing the stuff. The smell was strong because it was stale, stagnant water in the canals. And I was trying to get it out, and I kind of got it out, but I didn't. My mom kind of, then I was like, okay, where am I going to put it? I can only put it outside. We didn't have a machine for drying clothes. I'm caught. Mom's like, what the hell? And then I tell them. And then my dad said, maybe we should get the police involved. And my brother's like, Dad, these guys are expelled from school. They're not going to stop. It's not going to stop them. And my brother's 2 years older than me. And I remember my mom was listening to all of this conversation. And you know what my mom said? My mom's like, Le. She said like this. So after she's heard that her baby has just been, bullied, and it's not once, it's been going on for weeks, and now he's been thrown into a canal, and we're talking about getting the police, and here's my mom, and she was one of these, the word like we use is baratan, Singanese, like she was like one of these, women of the Sikh faith from, centuries ago. Mm-hmm. I lost my mom just over 8 years ago, but she was such a strong, power, emotionally, and she's like, look, we've given our heads, man. Like, your ancestors have given their heads. Like, why are you crying about getting a few pushes and people calling you names? And so, but at no point have I ever used, but the reason I am the way I am today is because of what I've gone through. Actually, I would say it's in reverse. I've gone through that. And I've said there is no chance that I would ever allow anyone around me in my vicinity to go through it, to either be the bully or to be bullied. And so, I've checked with my children, I've checked with family, like I will not tolerate bullying because of what I've gone through. And I was fortunate to have come out of it, and it's not really, I'm sure it's affected me, but it's not affected me as obviously as it could have.
Yeah, that's a tough one, and as you're talking about that, there are just images flashing through my mind from my own experiences that are similar in nature, and going through those experiences of being bullied, having your turban knocked off, being called names, being isolated, and then there's that personal experience, and I think for the audience, what's really whether it's racism, whether it's you're overweight, whether it's something else. At some level, I think everybody goes through some form of victimization, right? But I think what's important here is how we process that victimization. Now, on both fronts, I think it's important to acknowledge that if somebody is going through a situation where they are being bullied, that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to feel weak in that moment, right? But it's about shifting, and whether that's through some kind of therapy, reaching out for help. I think, we're in a place now where society looks at those things, and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to feel weak, right? I think what I'm hearing you say is it's more about shifting your internal dialogue, your internal perspective, your self-image, right? How you view yourself from being that victim constantly, and using, how can you use that to grow? There's this concept of post-traumatic growth versus post-traumatic stress or disorder, and this idea is of leveraging the adversity in your life as fuel for growth. So these are some of the things that I'm hearing you say, and are probably echoed right throughout the book, not just in one chapter, right?
It's because it doesn't end there, right? Adversity doesn't end at high school. Adversity doesn't end, with abusive parents or challenges within the household. But it is that mindset. It is how do we prepare or absorb, but also let go. My kind of visualization of baggage is, guess what you can do with baggage? You can release it. You can drop it. You have a choice to travel to a faraway country and take 2 pieces of checked luggage, or you take 1 piece of carry-on. That's your choice. That really is. You can actually function with clean underwear and clean socks and clean shirts for 10 days. There is something called laundry in other parts of the world. And it's a choice. But I think what happens, and one of the reasons I wanted to take my story and share some of those ones that kind of really touched Michael, was because if you don't declutter internally all of those things that you kind of hold on, it's like, well, why am I an angry young man? Well, because you don't know what I went through. Because what happens as we go through life, there is more adversity. There are more challenges. And actually some of those challenges that we faced as children are dwarfed as adults. Yeah. So now imagine if you're holding onto and you're hoarding all of those challenges. Imagine what starts to happen here in this body, in this house. So one of the reasons, again, I wanted to kind of, pull the book together was, look, I am your next door neighbor. I am the guy that lives, in the Peel region here in kind of, southern Ontario. I have a mortgage. I have a house. I have car payments. I have one kid that's going through university. I've got another one that will be starting in a few years, and I'm going to have to pay for that one as well. And so I go to Costco. We do no frills. We hit up Walmart. We shop around for butter and milk, just like most good Indian families. But I wanted to share that. Look, I've been through certain challenges, which I'm sure most of us have been. But this is how I'm decluttering, and this is how I'm working through them. And it allows me to constantly say over probably 2 decades that I live a blessed life. But people are like, but you haven't won the lottery, or you're not a multimillionaire, or you're not this and you're not that. It's like, well, those things mean you live a blessed life? Couldn't be further from the truth. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to share all of that goodness, the half glass full, cliche as part of what you find in the pages on the book.
Okay. That reminds me of something that Will Smith said in one of his inspirational, motivational speeches and stuff. He talks about how pain and suffering are intertwined, but the point at which you got to fix one of those two, pain is something that happens immediately. It's the first thing that happens to you, right? Suffering is something that you carry with you, like you said, as baggage, right? So people who have gone through something traumatic, they'll hold that suffering and carry it with them for so long. And for them, they want to exact revenge, and they want that person who did something to them to pay for it, right? But that's not how the world works. Like, once something like that happens, it's your responsibility after that pain to fix the suffering going on inside you. So what I'm hearing from what you're saying is you've managed to separate that and not carry the suffering from the pain that you felt all those years ago, living in the UK, and you just sort of managed to work through it and not carry it around like baggage, and use it as a kind of crutch to either let people know just how vulnerable you are or how disadvantaged you are, but instead you don't look at it like that, and you just kind of leave it in the back seat. It's not there anymore.
What's interesting is the transition from your first house to the second house. If I can kind of look at it from that vantage point of, you mentioned this idea that the pain, right? That happens. Something bad happens, or you perceive it as bad. You go through some kind of adversity, and then, after you're over that hump, if you will, there's almost this idea that at some level, we, I don't know if choose is the right word, but whether it's through habit, whether it's through some other reason, it kind of carries on. There's a continuation of that pain. Mm-hmm. Now, the way we translate that is now, based on what you just said, just to use that as an example, it's more like it transitions into suffering. Now, what's interesting as we're talking about this, how it transitions from that initial house to the second house, and perhaps, flows on from there. Let's, in one of the chapters, you talk about this idea of us being energetic beings. How, there's, when we measure our brain waves through an EEG, and then when, whether it's alpha brain waves or theta or delta, we can measure that stuff. But what I'm interested in is your perspective on some of the strategies that you've deployed in allowing yourself to heal, allowing yourself to move forward from this, allowing yourself for this to become an opportunity for growth, as opposed to a situation where you get trapped in that vortex or that cycle of victimization. So perhaps we can talk a little bit about that transition and some of these strategies that you've talked about in the book, and one of them being around this idea that we're energetic beings, and how that may help us to process some of our own things that we're dealing with, so they don't move from that one house to the next house. Because I think that's when we start to act upon these impulses, when we start to act upon this state of mind, oftentimes our actions are not very conducive to our bigger goals, right? Because sometimes we're impulsive or we're reactive, and we're not in a creative mode. And we know that stress and anxiety and all those things, they limit us to a certain state of being. And that state of being is not conducive to achieving goals, moving forward in a constructive way. So perhaps you can help us kind of contextualize that a little bit.
Absolutely, and I'll start with Diljit's kind of topic of Will Smith. So I read Will Smith's book, dropped in January of this year, called Will. When I got to chapter, I think it's 19 to 21 or 18 to 21, I read them, and I said to Cindy, and I'm like, wow, Will's promoting my book. Because here is this gentleman who was the biggest kind of, movie star, box office dollar figure ever, like nobody's come even close to him. Rap star legend, just an all-round great guy as well. Families all seems to be in the industry as well. And then he gets to a point in life, and this is why he's now sharing these motivational clips. He gets to a point where it's suddenly like, oh my God, I thought fame was going to fix all that. I thought the wealth I'd accumulated was going to fix all that. I thought like I was untouchable emotionally, and suddenly he was left bare. And then Will went on his own journey, his own spiritual journey. And so for me, I don't want to emphasize the suffering I went through as a child. For me, it was like, hey, it was just the way the cards were dealt. And at no point has it defined who I am today. But I do want it to be people to understand, to be able to go, oh my God, like I haven't been through half the adversity this individual has. And I'm looking at the world as it being a big shithole, and everyone's to blame but me. So I want, when you go through my book, I want people to go, just like we all do. When we all read something or watch something or listen to something, we contextualize it based upon our own lives and our own mindsets. And the three houses, again, are also contentment in order for you to live in this one, I spend like a fraction of one of the final chapters breaking down what are the three houses. House number one is this one, and it's all about contentment. In order for you to live in this one, you have to be content. What does he mean, content? But I am content, but maybe you're not, because you're emotionally on a roller coaster all the time. There are peaks and valleys that you are seemingly going on, depending on in situations that are happening to you or around you. The way you are processing things that are said at work or done at work. The one thing I was doing over a decade ago, I used to call it, I may have mentioned it in the book, is the outer body experience. So when I joined a company about 24 years ago, there were a lot of stresses. I was hired to do a particular job, but then expected to do several other because it was just the nature of the company. And if there was a failure, I'm a designer by trade, and so I was designing something that was going to be, shipping very expensive goods from A to B. And if there was a failure even on the prototype, my engineering manager was getting reamed to the point that I was like, oh my God, I can't fail. And so guess what that was doing to a younger version of me? Stress, shoulders, neck, sore throats, getting them every other month. I wasn't handling the stress levels. And so I had to work through it. And at that same time, I was also on a religious journey, I would say, more than a spiritual journey. And so being in meditative stages and situations, I think helped unconsciously. It wasn't something I was working to say, hey, I've got to sit for 2 hours because it will help. It was just breaking it down. But when I started to do what I call the outer body experience, which is when something dire, when I get that call that in April of 2000, my dad had what they call off licenses back home in the UK. In April of 2000, my wife was 6 months pregnant. We're expecting our first child. At 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, I get a call from my brother saying, Dad's just been shot. Somebody came into the store. It was, they're trying to do a robbery, but he's in intensive care. He's stable. Come home. And so when you get those types of calls, it's the fight or flight. It's the how do you handle the situation? And what I've been able to start doing is, instead of that vortex falling feeling of being sucked into some kind of a hole, and everything looks like it's being skewed and your vision starting to kind of, go blurry, I step away and I actually see myself there outside of the situation. And what that allows me to do, as crazy as this may sound, is I have a conversation with myself. Right, all right, buddy. He's stable, yeah. Things are okay, yeah. Could have been worse, yeah. It's urgent, but get yourself, find out, make sure your passport's, dates in issue, book a flight, talk to your company, make the few calls you've got to make, and out you get. As opposed to it becoming a tornado of emotions where I'm erratic and everything. So I've naturally found a way of calming myself as I go through it. And so they're tools. And so the tools that are used, just like our Kaleidoscope Toolbox podcast, those tools that I use for contentment, how do I stay more content? Colin loves sweets. Colin loves sugary stuff. Colin loves to be in the pantry, therefore Colin gains weight. And Colin doesn't like to gain weight, so guess what Colin does? He works out every day of the week to make sure he can eat the sweets and sugary stuff, which can cause other issues long term, but at least my pants still fit. And I'm kind of content. Colin's looking in the mirror. Colin's no longer a spring chicken. He's getting to look a bit more like an older rooster. That's all cool. Colin's got grey hairs coming in all over the place. Down with it. Will he ever dye his beard? Never. No chance. Contentment, these conversations, content within the body, in this body made of the elements. Content here, not always, but trying to be content to want to succeed at work, content to want to make sure everyone around me is happy versus successful, because I think there is a difference between. And so contentment, and as Abinda began to allude to with chapter 14, we're all energy beings, then that energy, I feel, that pulsates from me. And we were talking about this earlier as we were setting up. So most of you probably know, and if you don't know, you should know, I am a massive Liverpool Football Club fan. Every Saturday or Sunday morning when the footy's on TV, my little dog Jolly, who's by my side 24 hours a day if he could be, he feels my aura and my angst to the extent where he doesn't sit anywhere close to me. Rather, he shoots upstairs and he's either with Cindy in the room or he's over with the kids. Like, the dog can feel like me and Cindy were chatting about, so when do you get anxiety? I'm like, I don't know if I do. She's like, when you watch footy. I'm like, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's brought on. Like, what in the big scheme of things, what the hell does it mean to me and my life if they win or lose? Zero. Yeah. I describe, being a football fan or a sports fan as being like a believer in a particular religion or faith. These things are so similar. Yet, my energy is felt. And so, again, one of the areas of my research was around electromagnetic energy. Yes, I wear a particular product as a watch, but I can only wear digital watches. I cannot wear analog watches. I'm not sure if Abinda remembers or if he knows. If I wear an analog traditional watch, I actually ruin it. They stop working. I just thought it was because I was cheap, and the most expensive one I bought was a Tommy Hilfiger for like $110. And the batteries stopped working. Well, it wasn't until I went to the UK and my brother decided to give me his rotary watch, which was gifted to him on his 5th anniversary, which had no batteries, but it stopped working 7 or 8 days after I started to wear it. And I was like, oh shit. Strange. I better take this watch in and get the batteries fixed from the local jeweler in the UK. I drop it off. 4 days later, I go back to pick it up, and the jeweler who owns the store's like, I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah, did you replace the batteries? He said, son, it's a wind-up watch. These don't take batteries. And I'm like, oh. And he's like, it is broken. And I'm like, how? But I didn't kind of like damage it or anything. He's like, has it ever happened before? And I'm like, what? He's like, have watches stopped working that you wear before? I'm like, yeah, all the time. But they're just cheap watches. Let me show you something. So he grabbed one of those kind of, a magnifying glassy things, pulls his tools out, flips the back, and there are some mechanisms in there, and there's this little arm that kind of does this kind of like, it's not the second, it's either the second or the minute arm, and it had a slight twist in it. Mm-hmm. And he said, like, so it's off, and so he goes, you did that? And I'm like, I haven't opened it up. I haven't done that. He said, no, you've done it. I'm like, how? He goes, like, you probably got too much electric magnetic energy or kinetic energy in you. And I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like,
you've got superpowers.
Exactly. I'm like, holy shit. Am I like Marvel comic kind of guy? But Marvel wasn't big then. It was only a comic. But my point is, I went down a few rabbit holes 15 years ago when the internet was not as good as it was today, trying to figure out if there are other people like Uri Geller. Remember Uri Geller?
Yeah, bending the spoons.
Bending spoons and forks. But my point is, that's all irrelevant. But we are not the 5 elements that make this body. We are that pulsating energy that makes one of all the other critical organs do this. And as soon as that stops, guess what they have to do to get it back going again? Give a bit more electricity where the electricity had gone. Bring that circuit back. And so we are energy. We see the aura that is painted on, religious paintings. And science says, well, actually, it's not like a disc, a 2-foot disc shape behind a person. Everyone's aura is about 22, 23 feet in diameter. Now, let me explain that. When you sometimes have walked into a room and somebody has their back to you and something kicks off, and then after when you kind of, playing the playback in your mind and you go, oh my God, as soon as I walked in, I felt something wasn't right. Mm-hmm. I just knew something wasn't right. It's because we begin to rely on all of these kind of outwardly sensorial technologies that are part of our body, our ears, our eyes, our nose, our tongue, our mouth. We focus too much on those. We don't focus. Some say it's here. I don't know where it is, but I'm telling you it's here. And we don't focus, but the energy is communicating with other energy. I talk about it in my book, pigeons. Why do people use pigeons to send messages and been doing so for hundreds of years? Do you know why? A pigeon has a little bit of iron in its beak, natural substance found in its beak, works like a compass, allows it to go back in this energy field that surrounds the world, that surrounds the planet. And so all of these things are like, and then if I want to break it down into what Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhi, said, and if you read the beginning of Japji Sahib, the beginning of the Guru Granth Sahib, he literally is describing this thing that we all want to label as God. But he is saying there is no label. There is no description. It is without form. It is without time. It is without proportions. It's been here before. It's going to continue being here. It's like, what is this thing? Energy. It's energy. For me, I push the envelope of it is energy. We are energy. When we leave this body, what happens to us? I don't know, and I don't really care. We go places. We don't go places. Doesn't really matter. What matters is what we're doing here and how our energy is being used and translated and understood.
Yeah, that divine force, call it what you want, right? Like that idea of that divine force, divine energy, different ways to explain it. But how do we take that, right? This idea of electromagnetic energy, how do we take that and apply it in our day-to-day lives? For me, as you're talking about that, one thing comes to, whether it's that energy, that electricity, that is a byproduct of something else, whether you want to call it that divine light within us, whether you want to call it the soul, whatever name you want to put on it, I think from a very practical, pragmatic perspective, what's one thing perhaps you can share with the audience? Maybe from the book, maybe something related to the book, on how we can actually, an actionable strategy around this idea that we are, electromagnetic beings, but how can the average person take that idea and implement it in their life, as it were, in a meaningful, useful way?
Or even like, how does a person's energy affect, how they overall feel and what they attract? So, negative energy can repel, positive energy can attract good things. So let's talk about, your mom's energy. You mentioned how she was such a strong woman and everything. Like, how does Prince Charles come into play? Like, how does your mom's energy and who she was attract someone like Prince Charles? How does someone meet someone like
or
that?
as my mom called him, Charlie.
Charlie.
So I think, again, back to kind of starting with Arbinder, and then I'll kind of work over to Diljit's question as well, is everything is energy. Every living life force is energy. There is something called dowsing rods. They are made from particular tree branches. You can make them out of metallics as well. I carry a set in my bag over there. And dowsing rods I carry because dowsing rods have been used for hundreds of years, and they're still used today by multinational companies. Because when you've got to try and source underlying pipes or electricity cables, dowsing rods can actually show you where they may be, or if there's an underground stream, you're about to buy a property, do a greenfield development, and there is a suspicion of, companies will actually send out somebody that can actually operate these dowsing rods, which looks a bit like it's kind of like witchcraft, but it isn't. And so these rods actually allow the movement because moving water generates energy. Again, it's living. Do you know what I mean? Because it's oxygenated and it's all. So I would say that we are all living beings, animals, nature, everything there is energy. So I think as we're coming into this new, I'm in the auto sector, and industry is now being challenged with what we call circular economy. Sustainability. Like, look, it's great to say, look, we recycle. The big arguments here in North America are we do the separations at home, and those recycled materials, not all of them get recycled. A large portion of them still find themselves in the landfills. So in a circular economy, what is the end of life? Strategy for what you're doing with your goods and materials. We're building cars, in the auto sector. What happens after the 10-year life or the 15-year or the 20-year life? Do they get shipped to a developing nation? Is that the solution? No, it's not. What happens to the materials? What happens to the plastics? What happens to the printed circuit boards with semiconductors and chips on today? Are we... Sorry?
All the metal.
Yeah, all the metal.
Yeah.
What is happening? What does it truly get broken down, or does it just get crushed and some of it gets used? And so now everybody's kind of looking at that a little bit more seriously than they may have done in the last 50 years. And I would say what I kind of talk about in that particular chapter is, look, we are all connected. So we're talking about the war in Ukraine at the moment. It's headline news. I don't listen to a lot of news. I don't follow a lot of news on social media. I think Arbinder kind of brought out a stat which kind of really underlined it for me, which was, I think, watching 7 minutes of news can kind of, generate over 20% of feeling down, right? Don't want any part of it. And so, but, today we're seeing a war occurring because somebody wants to move into a piece of territory that he thinks, was theirs and therefore should now be his. And it's all the turmoil and everything going on, but the people on the ground are the ones that are being affected, And so for me, my attitude towards my fellow beings is, and you can ask everyone that's involved in my ecosystems at work and outside of work, and you can all ask them, and Arbinder has known me for longer, and Diljit, you've known me for a little less time, like, who is Colin and what is he like? Is he an absolute asshole when the cameras are off and the mics are away? Or is he okay? And I think people will say, he's all right. Funny accent,
You're all right there, lad.
Exactly. So it's because I'm trying to understand the connection between who we are. I don't try and see you for the color of your skin or the look and all of that other cliche stuff as well. I'm trying to say, look, we're here. As my boss Flavio says, we're on this spinning rock being encircled by this ball of flame. It's a goddamn miracle we're here anyway. Mm-hmm. Let's just make sure it's a good one. It's a good innings, right, as we would say in cricket terms. And I think we spoke about it a few pods ago about your DNA and your genes and how much of that may play a role in who you are today. How much of your environment shapes you, how much of your genetics shape you, and how much of your learning shapes you. And a big part of, I think, my shaping has been my mom and my dad. Both of them kind of these ginormous personalities. Whether we were at this particular Gurdwara or whether we're at some other kind of, or whether it's the family, they both carried themselves so well that, it was like, oh my.
It almost seemed like larger than life.
Yeah, how am I ever going to be anything close to, how am I ever going to make those right decisions that these two seem to be making? So about 14 years ago, my mom was 59 and she was diagnosed with cancer, and it was terminal. And so obviously we were all very, very concerned. Never been sick all of her life. She missed one day from work. That was the day my nana, my mom's father, passed away. And the following day she didn't go into work. Otherwise, never known her to be off work, sick. Always worked, always healthy, blah, blah, blah. And so her approach to it all, multiple bouts of chemo. We nearly lost her because of some of the side effect issues from the chemo. She used to keep saying the same things. One was, if I fall, I'll take all of you down with me. So that's why I'm not going to fall. If I fall, all of you are going to fall with me. I'm not going to fall. 1. 2, your dad's been really good. You boys ain't turned out too bad. I've had a really good life. I'm just going home. And that would be her other thing. And then thirdly, she made a list of how she wanted to go. Closed casket, Don't put any new clothes on me. Don't bathe me traditionally. Don't bring my body home, which is common in the UK. Blah, 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 blah. And all of these things, we were like, yeah, Mom, it's okay. Don't worry about it. All of those things actually benefited her children. Because when it was time to send her off ceremonially, it was done easier, because the casket was closed. I didn't see my mom there. We were able to not have the constant crying at home because, when you give out tea to people coming in the house, make sure you give them something sweet as well, which is not usual. So she did all of this, but on the 30th of June, my mom was in a hospice in Solihull in Birmingham, and they were fabulous. They treated my mom really well. The room which had space for my dad to be there. It was beautiful. And my mom was about to be sent home because just like my mom, they gave her 4 to 6 months, and then they gave her 4 to 6 weeks, and then they were like, okay, 5 years later, like, we don't know what to do with you, Mrs. Dillon. They actually ended up putting my mom under a Professor Poole at Warwick University, and she was on all this kind of research medication stuff going on. But in June of 2013, I think it was now, she was at the hospice. My dad went to pay the fees and to give a donation. And they said, it's a shame Mrs. Dillon's going tomorrow, Mr. Dillon. Prince Charles is coming on Friday to unveil and cut the ribbon for the hospice. My dad's like, oh, really? And so my dad went back to the room, and my wife Cindy was there at the time, and he said, Prince Charles is coming on Friday. My mum's like, I ain't going. My dad's like, but the paperwork's been done. And my mum's like, I ain't going. I want to see Charlie. And my dad's like, well, you speak to the manager, but I've got to go. And so my dad shot off to the stores, and when the nurse came around, my mum said, Charlie coming? And she said, yes, Mrs. Dillon, Prince Charles is coming. And Mum's like, I'm not going. And they're like, I think the paperwork's been done, Mrs. Dillon, to send you home. She's like, I ain't going. And so I said, well, okay, let me speak to the manager. So the manager comes by later and said, Mrs. Dillon, I hear you don't want to go. And she's like, yes, I want to see Charlie. And they said, well, okay, how about we send you Friday afternoon after he leaves? And why don't we also have a meet with you and Prince Charles as well? My mom was like, wow. She started to cry. Cindy was like, Mom. My mom was a warrior. The last time I saw her, which was just a few weeks before that, every time I left my mom, I used to say one thing to her, Mom, chin up. Let's show the rest of the world how people of faith go to the next stage of this journey. Because my family in England, we were the more religious, spiritual. So that was my whole thing is, you haven't cried throughout this ordeal. You haven't been, oh my God, oh why me? Chin up, the British way, stiff upper lip. Let's show the rest of the world how people of faith go. I said that and I left. And that was probably my last time I saw her actually. But I had to quickly come back because my dad's friends bumped into me in the hallway and they were like, we know it's past visiting hours, but do you mind? And I walked in less than a minute later, and you would have thought, her baby heading back to Canada, she may never see him again. She'd all be teared up and everything. Move the curtain away. My mom's a spring chicken. She's all good. She's not crying. That's who my mom was. She was detached emotionally from all of that stuff. And so she meets Prince Charles. Cindy actually she had a flight out on the Thursday. She's like, I'm going. I don't care to stick around. And my brother got her a new flight. No, it's a lifetime opportunity, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, the challenge was we were all Diana fans. And we were concerned that my mom would say something like, Charlie, bad, the way you treated Diana. We're like, Mom, don't say anything about Diana. He comes in. They spent, I think, 9 to 11 minutes in a room conversing, my dad, Cindy, my nephew, Simran, and my mom. And as Prince Charles left, he said to one of his staff, he said, I need to be kept up to date with Mrs. Dillon's condition. Okay. And so, hey, it was nice, photographs, all of that. And then 3 weeks later, I call on a regular basis, but about 3 weeks later, I call. My mom's like, guess who called? And I'm now thinking of some relative or cousin or sibling that she hasn't spoken to. I'm like, I don't know who. And she's like, Charlie's. And I'm like, who? Prince Charles. And she's like, yeah, Charlie. I'm like, what? Prince Charles called you? And she's like, well, his office called me. I'm like, why? They wanted to know how I was doing. I'm like, really? And I'm like, yeah. She goes, I've already told your dad. I think I'm off to Buckingham Palace. We'll have room for you as a gardener at Buckingham Palace. I'm off. I'm like, really? Every 3 weeks for the next 3 months, because it was literally 3 months to the day my mom passed. Every 3 weeks, my mom would get a call from Prince Charles's office. And then the day we had the funeral, we got home and there was a bouquet of white lilies and white roses and a handwritten letter from my dad from Prince Charles, a condolence letter, which was nice. And then I think it was the same evening, I think her name was Julie, one of the senior staff from the hospice, came and said, I don't know what happened inside that room because I was outside, but that isn't tokenism from the prince. Something connected. He connected with you guys, and that is why, this all continued. And even our family, and we talk about energy, everyone in that room, even the naysayers like Cindy, were like, oh my God, this guy, Prince Charles, he has such a nice, clean energy. Like, he didn't come across as the stereotypical prince that you would have thought. And if you do your reading actually on Prince Charles, you'll actually learn and understand he's actually a decent fella. There are stuff that's been said or been gone on, but, there are similarities. And so, it was a nice way. And my mom, the tears my mom shed when we said, Mom, why did you cry? She goes, I've been here for 40 years and I've been called Packy for literally every day of my life in the 60s and the 70s. I used to get, and these people's king, whose future king, is going to come and see me. My mom goes, that's why I cried. Not because I'm me seeing this guy. She goes, because them that treated me like nothing, that you guys took our jobs and they were racist to me. She goes, guess who I'm meeting and guess who they ain't meeting. She goes, it was it was a nice kind of, ending to the chapter.
That's a powerful, powerful story.
That's pretty wild.
And I think that we appreciate you sharing that with us because it's kind of intimate and it's and there's a lot of life lessons in that. And when we talk about this energy, I think through that example that you shared with us, there's so many nuggets of information that we can take away. We've got like golden nuggets, if you will. And I think one of them is, how we process and perceive things, right? And if we have a negative or a mindset that person is the other, and we've talked about this one, we're all connected, right? And maybe the byproduct is through this kind of connection at a soulful level, right? Or, electromagnetic level. Call it what you want. Point being is we connect at a different level. Call it our intuition, call it our, many different names for it, right? But I think when we connect with people, and we're talking about, this idea of houses, right? When what's in this house connects what's in that house with what's in that house, right? I think there's this level of authenticity. There's this level of attunement, right? Where one person is able to meet the other person where they're at. And there's some kind of synchronicity there. And so I think that's really important. But one thing I do want to say is when we talk about this idea of us being electromagnetic beings and how can we be in that state more often, one of the things we often talk about is the power of meditation. And I think just before we started this session, we talked about this idea that our brainwaves can be measured. Mm-hmm. And what they found is through different techniques and through meditation, even through acts of love, through various positive emotions, our left side of the brain and the right side of the brain becomes synchronous. And when we're in that state, we experience life very different than when we're leaning one way or the other. You can call it balance, if you will, right? So, one of the takeaways is how do we live a life in a more synchronous existence? Whether that's, with our left side and right side, and these are some of the things that can be measured, but what's important is how we perceive things, how we connect with other people, and that lasting impression, right? These are some of the lessons that we can take away from the experiences that you've shared, from that you've also shared in the book, but certainly within this podcast too, right?
One of the visualizations I think which could help people is a tightrope walker.
Mm-hmm.
You can tightrope walk, 4 foot off the ground, or you can tightrope walk across the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine being that individual that's on a 2.5-inch diameter rope or whatever that material is, with a shaft, and you're there, and you have to balance, all the thoughts, all the feelings, whatever's going on in life. Winds can come by. They typically, if you are doing the Grand Canyon one, they do check to make sure the winds aren't coming in a particular direction. But you have to stay on kilt on that rope, otherwise you're off. Mm-hmm. And so in life, for me, I use the visualization of a roller coaster. I don't do roller coasters. First of all, I don't do them because I vomit. I get motion sickness, but I don't do them in life anyway. My emotional state is I get angry though. Whew, do I have a friggin' anger? Like I burst, and then as quick as it goes up, it comes down, and then boom. I'm kind of boring in life. But me being this boring guy means that's a way I tap into my energy and others' energy, and I don't let things knock me off kilt. Like I may be okay at tightrope walking because I do that in life. I don't have the anxiety of like being on a project or going in to speak. I'm invited in May to speak in Munich, in Germany, at this huge automotive event. I'm super stoked that I've been asked to come out, but I'm going to be in front of like the top car designers in the world. Oh my God. And I've got to present for 25 minutes, but I don't let that kind of knock me off kilt like that. I stay on that rope. So my energy, my balance of the negative communication and the positives that are popping, and but I'm not good enough, all those conversations which I have on a regular basis, I just lessen the volume of them. I don't let them bother me because I know we all have them. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing. We all have that, that visual devil and the angel on the shoulder saying things. For me, it's going to be it's an opportunity for me to move the dial for Canada to be recognized as a global brand in automotive. So I am representing my country, and hey, I'm going to do it as well as I can, as opposed to, oh my God, the weight and the pressure of represent. Do you know what I mean? You can look at it through two lenses.
It's a real big deal.
But
what's going on,
but I won't carry that stress or the weight of it as a big deal. Like to me, it is an opportunity smile versus a oh my God sad face. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you can use that as like, and there's enough research out there now that when we take that energy, right, and you turn that energy and say, I'm excited for this, right? This is an opportunity, right? That our cortisol levels lower, right? Our stress levels start to diminish. So again, it's back to that internal house on how you frame what's going on, the perspective, how we're translating, interpreting the actual event. And the thing is, the way we've evolved as humans, whether what's going on in the outside world, in the environment, is real or not. Meaning, if I perceive something as going on and I see that as negative, in your case, you're going to go present in Munich to where some of the top figures in the automotive industry are going to be there, and you might feel, well, am I good enough? Am I going to say the right thing? Am I going to be judged? Are they going to judge my turban and beard and have a stereotypical understanding of this outwardly kind of outward appearance? But when you take all of that and you say, well, and you talked about this idea of dialing it down, that internal dialogue, but then using that as fuel, as energy, and saying, I'm excited, this is an opportunity. I think there's a lot of value in kind of understanding that there is a certain degree of power within us. And the thing is, whether, if we're having that internal dialogue, right, our body responds as if it's happening for real. So if it's imagined and you think it's real, and all those stresses that you talked about, you keep giving that fuel, well, your body actually reacts as if you're going through that emotion. So you're going to go into that fight or flight. So just knowing that as a tool, I think is so powerful for us. We may have already heard of it, right? But just reiterating the fact that it's important for us to understand that when we're inside that first house, the house of our being, right? In that moment, whatever I'm interpreting, that's exactly what you're going to get out. So if I keep interpreting as a negative event, then it's gonna your body's gonna react. The byproduct of your physiological reaction is going to be negative, right?
It's we all wake up every day. Well, we all hope to wake up every day, and I think we all have a choice at night, the night before, to do some pre-planning on how we're going to wake up the next day. And for me, as tough as it gets, look, my life isn't brilliant all the time, even though I live a blessed life. There are my ups and downs in my life. There are ups and downs in my career. There are ups and downs like everybody else's. But it's how you quantify them. It's how you look at them. And it's to understand that, look, we have these challenges are ahead. You break them down, the way I'm a problem solver. I'm a designer by trade, but I'm a problem solver today. Doesn't matter what the problems are, relationship problems, academic, design, innovation. I solve problems. And I do those because I simply just break down the situation. Like, hold on, let's make this into piecemeal size, break it out, and then just chip away at it. Simple as that. Problem at home. What is the situation? Can it be addressed? Is it me? Is it you? How do we kind of, make sure this doesn't happen again? If it does happen again, then, where does it fall on the dial of, oh, shit hits the fan, or, we're going to let this one slide. We categorize it, move on. As opposed to it being a bang, bang, bang every time there's a situation, because emotionally we can only take so much. Internally we can only take so much. I said to my dad several years ago, he came and spent some time, and I said to my dad, I said, Dad, even if I lived in England, I was never going to live at home. And he's like, yeah. I said, because I could never live under your dictatorship, I said to him. And he actually went back and told his brothers, and my dad's eldest brother, came the following year, and he's like, yeah, your dad told me you said something about the dictatorship, good one, because that's who we are. They're just strong personalities. Yet today, my son's going to be 22 and my daughter's going to be 17 this year. And I'm saying to both my kids, fly away. I don't want you to be living your lives for me. We're going to equip you with tools and equipment in life. And I want you to live your life for you. The decisions you make, good or bad, yours. We'll be here to support, but I don't want you to, in any shape, be living it. I think I've been doing it for many years to make sure, is my dad happy? Have I pleased my parents? Are they proud of me now? Because I was a little shit, basically, plainly and simply. I was the little scrapper, going nowhere, going to do nothing in life kind of kid. And so for many years, though, I felt like I was just trying to fill that void. And it was only maybe 10 years ago I actually understood that I didn't need to. That I needed to live my life for me. And if I live my life truly for me, that energy, again, radiates through others. That's, to me, that is really key. And the three houses, again, a village in the UK or a village in India, a village with a single house is not a village. A village is when there are multiple houses. So house number one, when there are multiple beings, and there has to be a communication and a connection. And the old saying of it takes a village to raise a child, but it's all about the connection. And how are you connected? Through language? Sometimes it's through energy. It doesn't have to be. How does my dog know and others' dogs know when their owner is around the corner? My dog and other dogs can actually sense you even before you're in viewing sight. You're 4 streets away. They know. How? Do your research. It's energy. They sense your energy. Oh, so actually that 22 feet in diameter is blown out to what, 250 or 400 feet? Don't know. But animals have that because they're not doing and using these ones as much as we are, where we're thinking, oh, this is it. You can speak eloquently. That means you've got it down. You're a master of communication. No, you've forgotten this communication.
I think more and more, especially in the West, this idea of, meditation, intuition, the sixth sense, different names, but it's becoming more and more normalized, and I think it's part of the everyday vocabulary now, right? But I think in different disciplines, they're called different things. But this idea is there's something beyond the 5 senses. There's something beyond our current understanding, and science is kind of that explanation or understanding of what we can quantify today. We once thought the world was flat. We found out it isn't.
Some still think it's flat.
Well, that's a whole different conversation. But my point being is, what we know true or as a fact today could be later on. And if you disproved or proved later on. But the key thing here is, if you look at the spiritual teachings, if you look at the spiritual masters, if you look at the teachings of people who have gone beyond the scope of our current understanding, right? It is those who have kind of, in different disciplines, have paved the way for a deeper understanding, for a deeper connection, right? And that's what's important, I think. And I think that's what is highlighted in parts of your book, that there is something beyond our physical senses. There is something beyond this human existence as we know it today. And whether it's religion, spirituality, or some other avenue, right, there is a movement to go inside and tap into something much greater than us.
The tagline of the book is a journey to a better life. I could have said amazing, fabulous, better. Mm-hmm. Better for me is doable. Amazing, maybe my life compared to Will Smith's life or somebody else. Do you get what I mean? Like, for me, even the choice of words I used to describe, I put some thought into them. Say better. Look, can you do better?
It's pragmatic.
Yeah.
It's pragmatic, right?
As opposed to,
you got to have that vision, but it has to be pragmatic too, because if it's about this idea that this is going to suddenly solve your problems, then you're going to become the CEO of Coca-Cola the next day after. And that it's about making incremental changes that are going to have compounding effects.
And most people aren't expecting that big change. They just want that, just a little bit.
But if you listen
to be a little better.
If you listen to certain motivational speakers, and there are some tremendous ones out there, and there are a few snake oil sellers out there, and for them it would be fabulous, they're amazing, but it will cost you $7,500 US, and it's a course, like and all of that stuff.
But you get $4,000 in bonuses.
Yeah. I also want to make sure it's clear that, and I think Harbinder touched upon it, is that journey to a better life is actually the inner journey. So the crescendo of my book, of these 290 pages, really is, look, we've all got to take that inner journey. We all have to understand who we are. For Colin to understand Harbinder or the Jeet, first he needs to try and understand who the hell Colin is, and figure out and declutter Colin, and to do get those black bags and fill them and donate to all of those bits and bobs. But first we've got to understand ourselves, and then we can kind of move to that, because guess what's happening? We're just not wanting to have those quiet conversations internally. For me, How many of us are willing to sit in a car for a 20 to 50 minute drive without listening to music or podcasts or anything? How many of us are willing to just listen to ourselves? We're not. As soon as we get up, it's put on the radio, put on the TV, distraction, the white noise in the background. Get ready. Okay, got in the car. I've got to be up on the news. I've got to listen to this. Got to do that. All the time. Getting to work. Got to have conversation. Got to be shoot the shit at the drinking fountain. We don't want silence, but we need silence. I talk about. I say, look, let's not call it meditation. Let's call it quiet time, because meditation's got a heavy connotation around it. So I'm like, every night, just sit for 5 to 10 minutes. Every night, just sit with yourselves and just ask yourselves, how was today? How did it go? What can I improve? How can I improve it? Work on yourself. Make those changes. You don't need somebody to tell you that you were a dick today. If you were a dick, yeah, I was a dick. Mm-hmm. Okay, how do I kind of overcome that? You know what Pinball said to me years ago when we first met? He said to me, I said, you know what? I'm great outside of the house. Like, I am Colin, loved by everyone. And I come home and I'm a bit short with my wife and the kids because of all the stresses of having to run several departments. He said, nah.
Do you think you could explain to us why silence, why we distract ourselves from wanting to be silent here in the West? And, in comparison to the East, where they talk about it as a positive journey, to be silent.
Hey, when you were naughty at school, you had to go and stand in the corner.
Oh, yeah.
Or you got kicked out of the classroom. I did anyway. Yeah. And kicked out of the classroom meant I wasn't around anybody. I was standing silently, quietly in the hallway. Or you were in detention. Detention normally in the UK meant all of you sat quietly having to write what was written on the wall, which was, I must not misbehave in class. And you have to keep writing it silently, quietly. And so there is this air of negativity around silence. Nobody wants to be on their own relationship-wise. To have no friends is to be a loser. To be the quiet kid in the class is the one that we all picked on. And so
there's something wrong with you.
There are connotations around negativity, around silence. And I think that plays out into our culture here in the West. Like I was just saying, get up in the morning, you need the radio, the TV, car, radio, TV, podcast, blah, 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 all the time. Noise.
Noise distraction.
Yeah. But if you go into Taoism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Hinduism, all of the isms and all of those coming from that part of the world, they talk about meditation and quiet time. Mm-hmm. They talk about you figuring out you. They talk about you conversing with you. And when is that done? Silently.
And it's not the same kind of silence that we talk about just being quiet. Silence is like clearing your mind so that you have the things that matter, that they can talk back to you. So you can kind of reflect through the day, or have that 30-minute meditation and think about what your day, your week, your month is going to look like, how your life is going to be in 10 years. And there's that silence in your mind from the distractions that lets you actually talk to yourself.
But, I'm going to throw in a little bit of a wrench into this conversation just to keep things a little bit interesting here, right? And I'm going to base it on the premise of our understanding of silence. Because if we've done any kind of meditation, whether it's spiritual meditation or just the let's call it functional meditation you might do at work, where you do a body scan and go into a kind of a lower brain state, where lower. Here's the thing with silence, and there's a saying, and I'm going to use this as the premise of where I want to take this, but just to keep things, I just want to add a different dimension here. Yeah. So, and that dimension is in like you mentioned Japji Sahib, which is the first prayer in Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which is the divine wisdom for the Sikhs. And in there it says, Chuppe na hovai, je lai rahan livdar. What that literally translates to in English is, by remaining silent outwardly, the internal chatter, your mind doesn't actually become silent. And this was a really interesting concept, because in the East, there was this idea where these religious people used to go around and they never used to talk. They used to practice silence. But what Guru Nanak Dev Ji asked them was, why is it that you are maintaining this outward silence for 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is, for a period of time? And they live like an ascetic. They detach themselves from everything on money and houses and relationships. But here's the thing. Even when they sat in solitude, in silence, their mind wouldn't shut up. Mm-hmm. Their mind, instant chatter, was still going. They were still driven by desires. Be it, different desires, but there was still desire there. So there was this different understanding of what it means to be silent. And more, I'm also finding that premise entering the conversation around meditation, even in the West now. Because people have tried Vipassana meditation. They've tried different types of Buddhist meditation. They've tried different spiritual disciplines, different disciplines. And what they found is the mind doesn't actually really, we're never in a state that. Now, I want to introduce another concept here is, now when it comes to Sikhism, right, and this idea of going inside, because I think that's central to this conversation, right? There's this idea of man tu jyot sarup hai, apna mool pehchan. What that, again, in English, that loosely translates to, oh my mind, you are the form of the divine light or that divine energy, right? Recognize your origin. So part of this process of going inside is figuring out who you are at your very core, right? Beyond just, what you think you are or what you've been taught to think you are. And this is very, very powerful because whether it's through this process or that process, the bottom line is every human being has fundamentally got to go inside and recognize their origin, right? And meditation is a tool to certainly quieten the mind, but I've started to kind of look at it in a slightly different way because I've also looked at meditation as passive meditation and active meditation. Because no matter how, it's a great feeling when you go into a meditative state and then you're there for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, 4 hours, whatever it is. You come out feeling great. But what happens 2 hours later? You fall back to who you are as a person. So whatever that meditative process is, it has to start changing us fundamentally at a subconscious level. And that's where there's kind of this convergence of ideas and convergence of philosophies and convergence of disciplines where people are starting to kind of, it has to be real, right? Because here's the thing, if you've been meditating for 5 or 10 years, and I know some of us, have been involved in meditations, I've certainly tried a lot of different approaches to meditation. But what I can say, there are some that have fundamentally changed me and some that have not. But I think it's about finding something that allows you to go inside. So I think just coming up a few levels, just understanding this idea of silence and what it actually means. Because by the very definition of, then we try and go silent and the mind doesn't become silent, then it kind of invalidates that whole process. So I think it's very important just to understand that you can be silent on the outside, but that doesn't mean your internal chatter is going to be quiet, right? It's about finding a process of reconciling, of bringing that down, like you said, turn the volume down, but also understanding, this idea of non-attachment is more important than not having, we're all going to have desires. And I think it was Buddha who said that, just from that vantage point, from Buddhism, it was around this idea that, you're going to have desires, but what's important is non-attachment to that desire. And Sikhi has something, similar, like this idea of chup na hove jalai rahan liftar. No matter how much you focus, how much you meditate, right? That internal dialogue sometimes just doesn't be quiet.
So, and I agree, because what Arbinder's explained there really is, today we're here and we don't want to have any silence. No silence to hear the internal noises. So we haven't even created the situation where we can have that conversation with each other. For me, that is stage one. To find time where you can converse with yourself, because truly you're conversing with that energy field, which is the maker. And then it moves into the other phase, which is the meditative kind of, the traditional meditation phase, where you're now trying to find or hear or feel the answers to the greater solutions of who we are, why we're here, and all that stuff that people have been writing about and talking about. And even then, I've sat again, like with Arbinder, we've sat with people who are, enlightened beings, as they say. And the one thing I learned very early was that chatter's never you've just got to acknowledge it and let it go. Acknowledge and let it go. Acknowledge and let it go. But you move on. But to me, I would say the kindergarten of the stages is this: are you willing to sit with yourself and listen to yourself? And we need to do that, because I think that improves us inwardly, therefore outwardly. That improves me as a person. It improves the quality of energy that I'm giving off. It means that I'm not going to be the dick that kind of you feel I'm the dick when you're around me. It feels that when there's a situation, I can quite easily own up to it, as opposed to try and stick the blame onto someone else, because somehow I think I'm beyond blame, or, oh my God, this could kind of look bad on me. No, if I own it, I own it.
That's a really good analysis, actually, of being able to own a mistake or something that you say. A lot of people, they'll just kind of, it's like, no, it's not my fault. That's not what I meant, or you're interpreting it the wrong way or something. It's like, oh, I said that. Yeah, you know what? You're right. I did say that. I'll own it. So it's
because what owning says is, we've agreed that there was a disagreement of words, and now how do we move forward? Yeah. For me, it's always, I tweeted yesterday saying, in life I don't look into the rearview mirror, because that's gone. It's past. I plan for the future, and I live in the now. Like, that is what I try and do. I don't look in the rear view. Like, I will get emotional about a story of a particular guy called Yossa who beat me up, and then, by the way, there's a happy ending to that where I kick his ass big time. When I'm now 17 and he's older. But my point is that doesn't define Colin. That story nowhere near, in the big scheme of things, defines Colin, but it's a great read. And so part of why I've shared some of these stories is because I didn't want this book to be so heavy that you would somehow think, well, okay, this guy thinks he's got all the answers. No, I'm saying, look, I'm on a journey. I'm trying to figure stuff out. This is what works. This is what hasn't worked. And, why don't you join me on this journey? Because, it's a pretty decent one. Life is actually good as opposed to bad.
You could give us like 2 or 3 points that people will take away from when they read your book. What it is that you really want them to practice. Like in your book, you're giving out some really good points and stories and life experiences and everything. How is it that 1 or 2 ways can someone use those experiences to better their own life?
So the book is structured, as I've said, there's like 18, 19 chapters. There are what I call the randomness stories. They're typically 1-pagers that follow strategically certain stories. So there are a lot of heavier stories. And in order for you to be raised out of the heaviness, I've dropped you a 1-pager about the voucher system that all of our parents came to the UK in, and it was called I called it the golden Wonka ticket, right? And so, but that's me in life. That's me to say, if I'm running a team of 50 people that report to me, and somebody needs to be pulled up, I will have that pull-up conversation without blinking an eye. But I'll also make sure I've protected them. I've got their back. I won't let them fall backwards when I do this. And so the structure of my book falls into the same as well, that if I'm sharing a heavy chapter, which, maybe takes you into a similar dark place, you will be then provided some light, positive, attributes in a very quick, 400-word kind of blurb. I would say the book is really about trying to kind of understand an average person like me, a common man, who could be your next door neighbor, who seems to be talking about a wonderful life that he's created with his life partner and his family. And if he can do it, I think we can too. Like, it's not difficult. It's not difficult to have goals in life and how to achieve those goals. Look, I'm blessed. I've got a great position today with regards to my career. I'm leading, Canada's first EV concept car build. Things are going really well. But guess what? I dream, I shoot, I create visions, and I go for them. I would even say today, a few months ago, Diljit and Arbinder and Colin said, hey, why don't we start a podcast? And then we spent weeks, very few weeks, defining the podcast, creating a name, developing the strategy behind, and off we go. And so again, for me, this is an achievement. And it may be small in certain people's kind of worlds, it's huge in others. And so for me, life is like that. It is these small pebbles that create that kind of solid surface for you to tread upon and for you to travel upon on this journey, because life is meant to be good. Life is meant to be better than it was before. And I think that's what I'm hoping people will get by the end of these 298 pages.